Welcome to the Boomers, Bucks, and Bling podcast, where we turn retirement planning into a bit of a thrill ride. I'm your host, Carl Spiteri, and each week we'll dive into everything from reverse mortgages and staying put in style to Medicare, Social Security, and home safety. But wait, there's more. We're not just going to talk all about money and business. We're going to add some sparkle, some bling, as we chat with travel pros, party planners, and a lot of different topics that's going to help you make the most of your golden years. So grab a cup of tea or whatever it is you want to drink, get comfy, and let's make retirement planning an adventure of a lifetime.
Thank you very much for joining this edition of Boomers, Bucks, and Bling. Today we have the privilege of Dr. Leland Ferguson, who's going to be joining us for a bit today. He's taken time out from his busy practice to give us some helpful insight. Leland, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here.
My pleasure. Why don't you tell us a little about you and your practice? Just give us a couple of minutes so we know who you are, and we'll go from there.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Dr. Leland Ferguson. I've been in practice for about 20 years. I got my start in chiropractic because my athleticism in high school. I was a track and cross-country runner. I was also a wrestler. I sustained many injuries. I had injured my hip and my knees, and because of that, I went to go see a local chiropractor who helped me out. And then in college, I became an athletic or a competitive cyclist for about 4 or 5 years. And then I started to have even more knee issues. And it wasn't until I saw another chiropractor that he actually helped me out there too. The local physical therapist in school had said, hey, we'll just tape you up and take a bunch of medication to stop racing. And that at 21, I didn't want to hear that as an option.
I would imagine.
Right. I was at the top of my game. And so when I did an internship at a chiropractic office, he adjusted me and the knee pain went away right away. I was able to get back in racing literally the next day. So that was just an epiphany about this is something, I don't know what he did, but I needed to learn what he did to me, and so I could pass it forward to somebody else. So fast forward about 5-10 years, I got married to a girl that I had met in college, and she had come down with a couple. She had a spinal disease, a spinal injury, meningitis, and whatnot, and got to the point where she couldn't walk anymore. She was wheelchair ridden, and all the neurologists said she wouldn't be able to walk again. So I refused to believe that. I soon entered chiropractic college, and so with all the doctors I was meeting, I took her to several really well-known chiropractors, and they were able to help her get back on her feet again when the neurologist said that she wouldn't walk again. So there's something about the whole chiropractic thing was becoming more and more interesting, way more than I could ever think about. And she's at a point where medically nobody knew what to do except for the chiropractors didn't really know either, but they knew that one thing that they could remove any interference in the spine that's helping prevent her from getting better. The adjustment was going to help her do that. And not only did she reclaim her circulation inside her body, but she also began to physically get better. She eventually did pass away because the meningitis really just did a number on her. But that was my motivation for finding out what this chiropractic thing was all about, not just helping her walk, but also just to help her to live a better life. And that's kind of like my big inspiration for helping people. It's not just about the neck pain, back pain, but it's about helping people become more mobile, be able to enjoy their lives, not just physically, but also, emotionally, mentally, and just overall better health.
Wow. Well, I didn't know that about you. Thanks for sharing. This show we talk about baby boomers and challenges that boomers kind of are facing. We're all kind of getting older one day at a time together, right?
Sure.
And you mentioned mobility, and mobility to me is your middle body here, the hip area, and I understand that's a cause a lot of times of immobility challenges that boomers might be facing or starting to face. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so absolutely. So understand that if you just kind of break your body into two main parts, you've got the structural issue. You've got the structure, which is like your frame of the chassis of the car. Then you also have the electrical system, and the electrical system of your car is helping to tell the vehicle what to do, when to do it, how to do it. The framework, of course, is the structure, and it can't do anything without that electrical system. So we we take care of people, seniors or non-seniors, adolescents and whatnot. We take care of both the electrical system as well as the framework. If we break the structural issues of a vehicle, you have your chassis, which is the frame. You also have the drivetrain, which helps to move the car. And so when I address mobility issues, we have to look at first the framework. Is the chassis strong enough to hold the drivetrain? Is the drivetrain itself, does that work? And then can they cohesively work together as a team? And what I see in my senior population is that both the framework, both the chassis or your skeletal system isn't as strong as it used to be, and also the drivetrain or your hips and your legs don't work as well too. So the number one problem we see in seniors are the hips. Hips are allowing yourself to actually move or stand, move around, walk around, hike, whatnot. And as you progress, those hips get more and more unstable, if not taken care of. And that the underlying cause can be either an electrical problem or a structural problem within the actual mainframe or the skeletal system. When I have a senior patient in my office, I know automatically that the hips are the number one thing that's going to be holding them back from wanting to be able to travel, pick up grandkids, whatever, even just standing still and doing dishes. The hips need to be stable, and more often than not, there is a problem in the hips, whether or not there are pain and symptoms. So we always want to acknowledge that you could be standing still and having hip issues is a problem into itself, even though you may not be feeling pain. So I know that when we're getting older, we still want to move around, and the hips are the one thing that allow us to move around. The first part of walking, if you understand walking, is your body has to lean forward, and walking is nothing more than catching your body from falling down. The problem is if you've got a hip issue, when you fall forward, the hips can't react fast enough for you to catch yourself from falling forward, as goes when you're trying to step from side to side. If you walk forward, the hips also have to prevent you from falling from side to side. And most injuries in the senior population are hip injuries. Hip replacements and knee replacements are the two biggest key words, or the hot topics in any senior population. It's hip replacements and knee replacements, hip being number one. So I, as a chiropractic practitioner, pay very close attention in my senior population to make sure those hips are working just fine. It's not just about being able to lift the hips, but it's also the ability for the hips to actually prevent you from falling to the side, because we don't walk from side to side, we walk forwards. But if a boat does not have a rudder that works, that boat's going to topple over no matter how well it's able to travel forward. So I need to make sure that rudder in your hips, the hips are the rudder, and also it's also the drivetrain to help you to go backwards and forwards. So I always check out my seniors' hips, regardless if there are symptoms there or not.
All right. So what do you do? What do you do to check somebody's hips? I mean, a hip's a hip, right? It's
Sure.
kind of there, connects the whole
Absolutely.
body together.
So we look at a couple different things. We look at range of motion. As you get older, your what we call passive range of motion, which is the motion that your hips do without your muscles actually moving. I can actually move your hips and find out how restricted that is. That tells me the overall ability for you to move without any strength. Then we start to look at how much strength can you resist. If you can't resist any strength, your ability to walk is very, very limited, or to run for that fact. And so when we do a resistance testing on your hips, we have to test the hips in a forward, backward, and side to side, also in a rotational motion. And it's the side to side rotational motion that gets most people a problem, because people understand the term sciatica. Sciatica is nothing more than the hips basically freezing up and squeezing a nerve that sends a horrible pain from the hip region all the way down into the past the knees into the feet. So I have to and must check the mobility and strength and the ability for it to resist the rotational forces, as well as forward and back and left and right.
Okay, so you're checking it. So I'm in your office and you check my strength and you say, okay, you need some work.
Right.
what are some things I can do maybe while I'm sitting around watching TV or laying on the floor? What would you suggest that I do to help with the I guess future hip challenges? Because like you said, we're all going to have them at some point in one
Absolutely.
extent or the other.
Yeah, so those are great questions. So I have three main exercises and stretches that would really help. If you dial back to the late 70s, early 80s, we had who was Suzanne Summers. That was she introduced the Thigh Master, right? And the
Right.
Thigh Master was actually a really, really great tool because it addresses one of the main muscle groups, what we call the adductors. The adductors are the muscles that help you to squeeze your knees together. And that's one of the main rudder systems of the hips. And most people don't pay attention to that because it's such a small muscle group, but it's absolutely super important. So you can take you can take a pillow, you can take your fist or your hands, and as you just squeeze your knees together, 10 to 20 reps, every like 2-3 times a day. It literally would take you 5 minutes to do that. But activating those inner thigh muscles, those adductors, really help to get that part of the rudder going. On the opposite side, you have your glutes. You have the glute medius. That's the outside portion. And things like leg lifts to this side will help to work and exercise those side muscles. Those are strengthening exercises. So long strengthening you also exercise. You also want to do lengthening. So you want every muscle has to be able to squeeze, but also has to be able to relax and extend. So it's like things like side lunges, forward lunges are great ways to do a global stretch on those adductors as well as those abductors. Lunges backwards and forwards will help to stretch out your hip flexors, also your hamstrings. Those are the hamstrings and hip flexors are muscles that help you to move backwards and forwards. So a really, really easy thing to do is, let's say you want to you take 100 steps. You're going to do 100 steps of a lunge, a really slow lunge. Your knees should touch the ground, but if you don't have enough mobility in the hips for your knees to touch the ground as you do in those walking lunges, just go as far as you can until you feel that nice stretch. And do about 100 steps. If you do 100 steps a day, it's literally going to take you maybe 5 minutes to do, but that will force you to use those hip flexors, to use those hip extensors, as well as challenge those the rudder of your hips, the adductors and your abductors, the muscles that help you to move your knees in and out, to really get that to because otherwise, if just walking is not enough to challenge those muscles.
So a lunge. Describe a lunge. What is a lunge for?
So a lunge is exactly what it sounds like. You're basically taking one step and you're taking one step forward, little bit longer than your normal stride. You're simply just bending at the knees and the hips to get yourself closer to the ground, making your center of gravity lower. And you basically just come back up and you take another walk forward. So it's like a really, really slow walk. A lunge to the side, you're just doing a side step. So instead of just a step shoulder width, you take maybe like a shoulder width and a half, or maybe twice the shoulder width. You basically set to the side. You just lunge this, just step to the side and hold it for about a second, come back up and do it again, do it to the other side. Those general slow movements are what are needed in order to challenge the body, to tell your body, hey, we're going to walk, but we're going to walk very, very slowly. But we have to challenge them. We've got to push those muscles so they understand that should you fall, the muscles will be ready to handle that fall should you need it.
Okay. All right. So we went to diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
You're going to test the strength. Went to some exercises that can help strengthen us.
Absolutely.
So that isn't really what we need. So that's not quite enough. So what would be the next step toward that?
So if we've gotten together and I've been able to adjust you, one thing that's really, really critical as I look at what's happening with your opposite shoulder. So let's say you've been having some left hip issues. Well, I want to know what's happening with that right shoulder as well too. Understand, that when you walk forward with your left leg, what arm has to come forward to balance it out? It's going to be the opposite arm. So your left leg comes forward, the right arm has to come forward. If you have a pre-existing right shoulder problem, that's going to interfere with the ability for that left hip that's also injured to move forward. So you're going to have a shorter stride on one side. That right shoulder problem is also going to prevent that hip from firing correctly.
So up here, my shoulder hurts.
Your shoulder hurts.
It's going to affect my hip, which is down here.
Absolutely, 100%. So it's kind of it's a double whammy. So you have You have to make sure that you understand that the immobility of any part of your body, if you've got a bum right shoulder, that's going to interfere with your opposite hip from working. So we could solve the right hip issue, but if your right shoulder is still bothering you because you can't move the arm because it hurts, the left leg isn't going to have a bigger stride because it's still going to compensate for the lack of proper range of motion of that shoulder. So when we look at the body, we look at the body in totality. That's why they call it a holistic approach. Holistic, whole just means the whole body. We're looking at the whole system, not just one part. So we want to address the body, not just neurologically. That's the electrical system, the structural system, and also your drivetrain system. But then how is the body able to coordinate with itself? If you watch enough people, as a chiropractor, I watch people walk and stand all day long, and I can within a couple steps, I can tell exactly what's happening with the person, what the body is doing, what the person's feeling, just based upon what kind of gait they have. Is the left leg taking a shorter stride than the right side? Is one arm moving and the other arm isn't moving? That's one telltale sign. You can just watch the shoulders. If the hands are moving, that they're good. But if they aren't, if they're moving inadequately, chances are it's either coming from the shoulder or more possibly it's going to come from the hip.
Huh. Okay. All right. So diagnosis, exercise.
Yeah.
You kind of massaging and kind of twisting and bending people around to kind of get them stronger, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So hip replacement, that to me, that sounds like, oh my goodness, I don't want to do this. Right. But yet it's probably one of the most popular surgeries for seniors.
Absolutely.
So at what point should they engage in a hip surgeon for that diagnosis, as opposed to, when do they say it's time? How would you know?
Right. So absolutely. Yeah, it's a good question. So you're probably going to know if the pain is such that no amount of massage, acupuncture, chiropractic is helping at all. The next step would be, when I see this kind of situation, if I'm working on somebody for, let's say, more than 5-6 times and it's not changed, that the results aren't changing, I'm not seeing the response that I should be seeing, and there's a dramatic decrease in the normal range of motion, I'm going to send them out for an MRI. Now, understand MRIs is the map for surgery. Surgeons want to know what they're working on. I'd say just because you have hip pain, don't necessarily jump to the conclusion that you need a hip replacement, because after all, the hip replacement is a buzzword now. It seems like everybody's getting them.
Right.
And just because you have hip pain doesn't mean you need it. But again, it doesn't also mean you don't need it. So we have to understand that my first approach, I'm not opposed to having hip surgery. There's a time and a place for any surgeries. But I think it doesn't need to be the first option to choose when you're thinking it's either medication or surgery. There are other options besides getting cut open or trying to medicate yourself. So like I said, I'm not opposed to surgery. I'm just opposed to putting the cart before the horse before it's time. So my advice would be, get yourself checked out. Massages are good for muscles. Chiropractic is great for joints and getting the system tuned up both electrically and as well as biomechanically. But like I said, if the results aren't changing and things are still not working great, and even like symptoms are getting worse after care, then I'd say, okay, let's go ahead and send you off for an MRI, check to see what the joint is looking like. Usually there should be a nice space, because understand that bones and bone they want to have some sort of cushion between. There's got to be some sort of cushion. So if the cushion is completely worn out, like if you look at your brakes, if you hear your brakes, and not only is your braking power, your car gone down, but it also starts to squeak, and squeaking so loud that you can't stand it, it's probably that you need a total brake replacement. You just can't not drive. You have to take that vehicle in to say, hey, my brake pad is worn down. There's no more rubber left over. It's now just metal. That's exactly what hip replacement is for. It's like, you need to get that replaced. But if you have a brake pad that's just slightly worn, we can still work with that. You don't necessarily need to get the whole thing replaced. So better to check it out before versus wait until you need it. Sometimes we can prolong the life of hip just by giving a little bit of tweak, so we can extend the life. And I like to use an analogy of car tires. If you've got a misaligned car tire, that tire is probably going to wear out a lot quicker versus if you just took it to a shop and had your car tire or your car wheels aligned. the rubber's going to last a lot longer. Versus if it's misaligned, that car tire is going to wear very, very quickly compared to one that's aligned properly. So same thing with the hips, any joint specifically. The hips must be aligned and working properly. Otherwise, it's going to be hip surgery time before you know it.
You know, my favorite car period at someone of my age would be in, you know, the 60s and 70s. And I just kind of came to the realization, I'm not getting older. I'm just turning into a classic automobile, right?
Yeah. It's just really hard to find parts.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess the last part of this is, okay, so I whatever, you tried to help, you can't help. I go in, I get surgery, I get hip replacement surgery. What do I do?
Sure, absolutely. So the general protocol is surgery. Then they're probably going to put you through 3 months of physical therapy to help you rehab that. And my suggestion is always after you're done with the surgery, if you feel like you can start walking again, come back in. There's still parts, there's still joints around the hip that are still needing movement. Understand the hip we don't walk on our hips, we walk on our feet, right? So the hip is influenced by the next joint, which are the knees. The knees are influenced by the feet. So anytime I have a hip person come in, I don't just look at the hips. I look at the structural issues from the feet, maybe put them to some corrective footwear, some corrective foot supports, make sure the knee is operating just right. And then, because it's one big dynamic system, as well as the L3, L4, L5 region right above the hip. The pelvis itself has 3 different joints, which influence the hip as well too. So there are a lot of little moving parts that are super necessary to be moving around, and all of which can influence the hip mobility. And like I said, if there's any previous injuries, we want to address that too. So just to basically sum it up for any hip issues, we look at everything from the ground and up structurally, and then neurologically from the head down.
Great. Well, Leland, I promised you we'd be off. We wouldn't take too much of your day, so I want to thank you very, very much for coming on this episode. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Absolutely. So they can find me online at SD Back Pain. That's for San Diego, sdbackpain.com. They can even give me a ring on my line. It's 858-458-5144. Or if you also want to shoot me an email, it's drlelandferguson@gmail.com. It's drlelandferguson@gmail.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook as well too. You can just look me up online there. But look forward to any questions, emails, and whatnot.
Leland, thank you once again for your time. I truly appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for your time, Carl. Appreciate it too.
The content of this podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or professional advice. You should not rely solely on the information presented here to make any decisions. We recommend seeking the guidance of a qualified professional for any specific situation. Arc Latex Financial Services, LLC, NMLS number 2143. Its hosts and guests cannot be held liable for any losses, damages, or other negative consequences arising from their use of the information presented in this podcast. For license information, visit www.nmlsconsumeraccess.org. Equal housing opportunity.